welcoming you to a life of awareness. The Presence Project is excited for you to join us for today's podcast with your host, Paul Kerzner.
Hello and welcome to episode 67 of Are You Being Present? My name is Paul Kerzner. I want to welcome you to the present moment. I want to welcome you to the here and now. And I want to thank you wholeheartedly, sincerely, and deeply for joining me in this momentous and amazing present moment. The title and topic of today's podcast is Trauma Processing with Presence. And it's a topic that I've been thinking about for pretty much the past 6 months, maybe a little bit longer. And it's definitely a topic that I talk to patients about at my clinic, because who hasn't been traumatized in some way, shape, or form? I'd say the majority of people walking around right now have been traumatized. And the reality is that traumatized people traumatize other people. Sometimes it's conscious and sometimes it's unconscious. So I wanted to bring this topic to the forefront and talk about how you can process trauma in the present moment so that you can heal and let go and forgive, not the other person, but for yourself. And so you can be present, because if you're constantly living in the past or the future, thinking about the trauma that happened or worrying about trauma that might happen, it becomes very difficult to be in the here and now. So the question is what is trauma processing? And that's definitely a topic by itself, and it could be a rather lengthy podcast, but trauma processing is pretty much what the words mean. You're processing trauma. And that could be trauma that accumulated over a lifetime. That could be childhood trauma. That could be recent trauma. Trauma is trauma. Those are negative experiences that have impacted you, that have imprinted upon you, that have hurt you, that have caused harm to you. And also trauma that you've inflicted upon other people. It goes both ways. So everyone has had a traumatic situation, and it's not worthwhile to compare your trauma to anyone else's trauma. Comparison is a tool of the ego, and it's not a worthy endeavor to look at what someone else has been through in comparison to what you've been through, because the reality is subjective. And what I would say is reflect on your own experiences and what you consider to be traumatic, momentous moments that have shifted your reality. The beauty of the human body and the human mind is that it does a really good job of protecting oneself. So when we go through a traumatic situation, we enter into survival mode, and the body and the mind encapsulate the traumatic experience, basically storing it for another time because it's just too much to handle in that moment. You just want to get through it. And it's an amazing survival technique, but the challenge is that it's still there. You can't pretend like it didn't happen, and it's always underneath the surface. And sometimes it doesn't take too much to poke and prod for that trauma to come out at the wrong time, at the wrong place, at the wrong person. And so as human beings, it's our responsibility, when we're ready, capable, and willing to deal with our trauma and not to involve others when we're processing our trauma. And so I would recommend entering into a state of maybe not isolation, but definitely like full isolation. But trying to separate yourself from time to time to dig deeper into some of the things that happened to you. And therapy is very helpful. It's not 100% necessary, but many people use it very successfully. And I think that it's a good tool, and especially if you have a good relationship with a therapist. Cognitive behavioral therapy would also be a helpful form of therapy itself, because you'll get good tools on what to do with some of these traumatic memories. So what does it mean to process trauma with presence? Well, the beauty of presence is that it allows you to see things more clearly, but of course you have to use your tools to get to the present moment and maintain your state of presence. When you get into that state of presence, you can allow those traumatic memories to come forward. Now, it's not something that you should rush into, and it's definitely something that you should spend a little bit of time preparing oneself for, because there's a good chance that when you start processing trauma in the present moment, you might relive some of those experiences. You might experience some of those feelings. That's totally normal. The beauty of processing trauma in the present moment is that you could process it as the person you are today, the person you are in the here and now, the person who has all the tools or has more tools to go through what happened, how it happened, why it happened, and what you want to do about it. Now, I'm all for staying in the present moment, but when trauma takes place, it wedges itself into your psyche, and it always becomes very difficult to stay present when you've accumulated a lot of trauma throughout your incarnation, throughout your life. So this is not a suggestion for me saying that you should just spend all your time in the past. I think it's a worthy endeavor, a worthy expenditure of your present moment to dig into some of the things that have taken place that have really caused harm and look at them through a different lens. The beauty is that as long as you're being present in the here and now, you remember or you remind yourself that the feelings that are coming up from processing that trauma are only temporary. They're not going to last. That's the beauty of presence, is the reminder that everything is impermanent, that impermanence is not a real thing. That's a tool of your ego to make you think that it's never going to end. That's not true. So when you start digging into those traumatic memories and feelings come up, you can process them with the intelligence and the experience that you have now, who you are now. You're a different person now. The person you are today would not respond or even react to the same way that what happened when you were being traumatized. Now, I'm not here to trivialize any of your experiences, because trauma comes in all shapes and forms, and it's all terrible, and it's very powerful, and we all carry it around like an anchor or baggage. And it's up to you to decide when enough is enough, when you've carried enough, when you're ready to heal. But healing is not linear. Healing is subjective, and trauma processing is subjective. And so it could take a short time, or it could take a long time. It'll take as long as it needs, and that's the reminder that I want to impress upon you, is trauma processing has a power to itself. And you don't get to determine how long it takes to heal, but it is up to you to have the willingness and the desire to allow those traumatic memories to come forward, because you want to heal them for yourself, not for anyone else, so that you could be a more calm, balanced, centered individual. The challenge is the more trauma you carry, the less present you could be. The more volatile are the emotions that you experience on a day-to-day basis, because you're doing your best to compartmentalize or tamper down all that trauma that's just bubbling to the surface, asking to be healed. But, life is life, and you have choices and decisions to make. And one of those decisions every day of your life is, are you ready to deal with the trauma that has taken place? And only you can answer that question. I have done a tremendous amount of trauma processing in my life, and I will continue to dig deeper, because I want to understand and I want to heal the things that have happened to me, and more importantly for me, so I could be a more actualized, present human being. I wanted to take time to really address this specific topic because I've never met an individual that hasn't experienced some level of trauma here on earth. No one is absolved, because interpersonal relationships are challenging and are fraught with trauma. And as I said in the beginning of this podcast, traumatized people traumatize other people. And you have to make sure that you're not inadvertently traumatizing other people and replaying experiences that have happened to you. And I say inadvertently because most people wouldn't want to advertently cause harm or traumatize other people. It becomes subconscious, and then it gets stuck in a loop. So being present means that you can see this loop for what it is, you can zoom out, and you can start healing yourself so that you don't have to keep doing these things to yourself and to other people, because it doesn't feel good, and it doesn't lead to a very present lifestyle, a very present, your ability to be present and stay present. And as you know, I value presence over everything else. I feel like trauma is a good teacher. It's a terrible experience, yes, but it's a good teacher. It allows us to be introspective. It allows us to see things through a painful lens, but it stays with us until we're ready to see it, heal it, feel it, and move on from it. And that is why I've decided to take a little bit of time and talk on this topic, because I want you to think about all the trauma that you've experienced in your life and how it's playing out in your present moments, how it's affecting you, your reality, your behavior, your emotions, your thoughts, your regrets. Because when you carry enough trauma, you act out and then you just compound and have regrets through the way you've been behaving, through the things you're saying, because you don't necessarily mean it. But the pain is so palpable that you almost can't help it. And if you're being present and you're watching it, all you're saying is, wow, look at all that. Look at how I feel. Why is this happening? Let me dig into this. Let me see this through the present moment, with a present lens, without judgment. Okay. Before I end this podcast, I want to just make a suggestion as you're doing your trauma processing. And it's something that I do think about often, is observing without judgment. Not just yourself, not just other people, but everything. When you do trauma processing, it's really important to make sure that your ego isn't being judgmental, that you can see things through an objective lens. And it doesn't mean that you're condoning the things that have happened to you at all. But to properly heal trauma, you have to have some level of objectivity so that you can give yourself the healing that needs to take place in those present moments, so that you can be kind to yourself and supportive and loving and empathetic for yourself without being judgmental. So I want to thank you for spending some time with me today listening to this topic. It's very important, and it's something that I value and work with in my clinic, but in my life, and will continue to do. And it's something that I wish for you to do. And I want to thank you for joining me in this present moment.
Thank you for listening to the Are You Being Present podcast, brought to you by the Presence Projects. Remember, you have a choice. Choose to be present.